Hello and welcome to Monocle on Culture. I'm Robert Bounds. On today's show, we're dipping a toe into the fast-moving world of avant-garde music by exploring the life, times and works of a record label that lives on the fine line between classical music, experimental art, electronica and dance music. Helpfully, it's called Nonclassical and it's celebrating its 20th birthday with some artful musical parties in London. I'll be speaking with its founder, Gabriel Prokofiev, also one of its key artists, and another of its composers, Tonia Ko, about working with things that aren't quite instruments, sharing the love for innovative musical forms, and the importance of attracting an audience, that all-important allure of live music. So, snuggle into your finest hi-fi headphones for a taste of musical exploration right here on Monocle on Culture. Now, the bright-eyed and sharp-eared amongst you may well have seen and heard incongruous sights and sounds on the streets of London and seen the makings, therefore, of a music scene that mixes the orchestral, the classical, with the contemporary, electronica, dance music, loops and beats. Maybe you've witnessed a double bass being manhandled through a nightclub or a piano being wheeled into a dance tent at a festival. Well, that might have been a breadcrumb dropped by Nonclassical. Nonclassical is a record label, event producer and promoter that's been celebrating its 20th birthday this year with a series of concerts that highlight its philosophy and roster. They put on avant-garde orchestral music in unlikely spaces and are known and loved for pushing the musical envelope and redefining genres of music. Nonclassical have also been instrumental in drawing new audiences to unusual music and performances. The importance of events, of liveness, has also been key, as have recent collaborations with London's Barbican and London Symphony Orchestra. Two significant ticks in the box, perhaps, for Nonclassical in its 20th year. So today we're speaking to its founder, the composer Gabriel Prokofiev, yes, grandson of that Prokofiev, and then we'll speak to Tonia Ko, another composer and a key exponent of the non-classical vibe. First, here's Gabriel. Gabriel, it's wonderful to have you here on the show today. First of all, we should pop a virtual call to Nonclassical's 20th birthday. Recently happened at the Hackney Empire here in London. An all-star cast, you versus the London Symphony Orchestra.
That's what
Times. That's what we do. It's a collab, right? It's
a
collab.
Yeah.
So tell us about that. That must have been a wonderful evening. Sad for the Monocle on Culture Massive not to make it to the Hackney Empire that night, but you're imbuing the spirit of it.
Definitely, yeah. We're still high off the success of that event. I mean, on so many levels, it was such a beautiful way to celebrate 20 years of what we've been doing, bringing contemporary classical music to new spaces, new audiences. And it did that in the most magical way because we had the LSO, London Symphony Orchestra, on stage, just playing to a level that is just so magical and adds all the music kind of has this extra sort of silver lining on it, when they play. And we had 13 living composers. I think 10 of us were there in the venue and all took bows and we'd taken out all the chairs in the stalls of Hackney Empire. So downstairs was just like a gig. Everyone was standing, but it was totally packed. We had at least 1,000 people there. And it was such a mixed audience, generally much younger than your average classical concert, though there were older people as well. And the attention, the kind of engagement from the audience was fantastic. I mean, people just got into music. Some of it was really challenging, and everyone was just right in there. It was amazing.
So there's moments to lull along to, there's pin drop moments, there's, definitely, as you say, this sort of maximum engagement, which is what you're in the business of and what Nonclassical for 20 years has been in the business of. And I want to talk about venues and spaces and when is a space not a space and a venue not a venue and when is it one. Maybe we'll come to that later. But specifically with the Hackney Empire gig, does that change the repertoire? Do you have to think ahead of that on the night, or we're going to have everyone standing, so we need a little bit more whip crack away kind of stuff, or was it pretty much set in stone, the repertoire?
No, I mean, I think we always, generally, in all our events, we want to have a certain amount of really dynamic impactful repertoire, because you want people to come in and instantly create a connection and that get them excited. And then you want to balance that with maybe some slightly more challenging, slower moving pieces. And that's what we had. And I think the one thing, that sometimes you can't do in a sort of standing up venue is have a really long, slow piece, because it's just hard work to be standing for something like that. But that's fine. There are other people doing events that work for that, So yeah, we kind of have a similar approach to the program. And the big thing as well is that we tend to always have 3 sets with 2 intervals rather than just 1 interval. So the sets are a bit shorter, and it means that they can really be focused for that 25-minute set. And what was hilarious in Hackney Empire, as soon as the music stopped, a massive roar of chat started, which is everyone talking about what they've just heard. And you've got to give people a chance to do that. And you don't get that at a traditional classical concert. It's sort of people, by the time the interval comes, everyone's just kind of, wow, they're a bit overwhelmed. But here, you kind of keep the energy going.
Yeah. And also there's that, I mean, you know this much better than I do as a composer, as a frequenter perhaps of more concert halls, therefore, also. But that at a moment during traditional classical music, or the traditional staging of classical music, where people kind of want to clap but can't because it's only the 3rd movement or whatever it is. What about that? How does that sit with you, and perhaps in regards to this 20th century bash in Hackney?
Yeah, well, I mean, I think, that concept of being kind of so almost quasi-religious in a classical performance.
People want to react, don't
they?
They
do,
love a piece of
and
virtuosic playing or whatever it is.
And that's actually not that. That's not actually part of the long history of classical music. That's something that came in the 20th century, kind of mid-20th century, and we want people to be able to feel free to express themselves. And the thing is, the musicians appreciate that. I mean, this particular concert, we had. Most of the pieces were around about 4 minutes long, and they were separate pieces. So there was no question about clapping between movements. But there were moments when people let out kind of shouts of appreciation and little excitement. Tonia Ko, who you're going to speak to in a moment, there was a real excitement with what she was doing. I won't say what she was doing, but she was doing a very unique performance. And that really was a pin drop moment. But then when she did certain things, it got a big reaction. It's some laughter actually as well, which was really nice.
Which is a nice sort of mass exhalation of breath for an audience as well, isn't it? Yeah. There are moments of tension and release for an audience as much as for the performers and for the orchestras involved. Yeah. Well, many congratulations on 20 years. I'm going to have to ask you that question. I know you've spoken about this many, many times before, but where did it start for non-classical? You're obviously a composer yourself. Yeah. It's always nice, therefore, to have a place for your work to be published and put out into the world. Yeah. But how did non-classical come about? Was it answering a question that you personally were asking, or you felt that the sort of contemporary orchestral music was asking at about that time in 2004?
I mean, it came out of me being a composer who felt that there weren't enough performance opportunities, and I felt that all of us living composers, we weren't really having a dialogue with our peer groups and with a wider group. It felt so inward-looking, the contemporary classical scene. It has a support network that's basically based in the conservatoires and with a few ensembles. And I wanted to share my music with my friends, with other people who are living a life in 21st century Europe and have things in common. That's what I'm writing from my experiences, and I'm sure they mean something to other people. And there just wasn't any opportunities, so I thought, well, I don't have a choice. I've got to put on some nights myself. And it started, I'd done a string quartet with the Elysian Quartet. That was the kind of first thing. We were releasing an album. So then the album was released on Nonclassical Records as a label, and then the launch event became the beginning of the Non-Classical Nights. And as soon as I'd done it, I started getting emails, phone calls from other composers saying, I've got a piece that could work for this. Yeah. I've got something else. And suddenly I thought, wow, there is a real hunger for this. But I can't say I'd really looked around and thought, okay, let's form a group. It just kind of formed in an organic way. Yeah. And then more and more people wanted to get involved.
So it kind of has an organic thing, as you said, and therefore a sort of community builds up around it. There are big sort of non-classical super fans. I think, the gigs and concerts and happenings that are put on under your umbrella are well-attended, interesting things. And they are well known for sort of pushing the envelope a bit. And for, as we said at the beginning, a bit like your Hackney Empire thing, but more experimental than that in some of the venues that you use and some of the instrumentation that you use as well. Was that just the nature of the music that you were making and your kind of fellow composers, some of your kind of compadres in 21st century contemporary orchestral European music?
I mean, I think in terms of the venues, I had this idea that I wanted to put on a classical ensemble like a string quartet or, solo harp or a flute trio or something in the last possible venue you'd expect. The stickier the carpet, the better. That was kind of my philosophy because I thought that's going to really shake up people's expectations. And it's amazing what happens. You can actually put on, I think, music that's really quite challenging, and it feels much more at home in those venues than it does in a concert hall. When you put it in a classical concert venue, it all gets even more serious. Whereas when you take something maybe that is quite intellectual into a much more informal venue, suddenly it becomes a reflection of the real world rather than some sort of study of the history of music or kind of, different systems of tonality or whatever. It actually just you start to notice how it does reflect the world we live in.
So Schoenberg and Poulenc should have been missing a trick.
Yeah, definitely. I mean, we did actually once do a whole night of Schoenberg's Pierre Lunaire. I think it was an anniversary or something. And that was, in the Macbeth, which is this regular venue for 2 or 3 years, which is a pub in Hoxton. It was so different then, so much more fun.
Yeah.
And we also, I remember another funny one we did was we did a birthday party for Wagner, and we had a real, like, hardcore Wagnerian mezzo-soprano, and she stood right at the back of the room, and when she let rip, everyone was covering their ears. But it was sort of like, it was more powerful than a whole stack of Marshall guitar amps.
Yeah,
that was hilarious. Yeah.
In researching Nonclassical's output and your own, Gabriel, for this programme, I lent heavily on Spotify. Yeah. Now, that algorithm is an interesting one. It's often criticised by musicians of all genres, but also it does bring up interesting things. And, of course, some of your work, and you're going to maybe hate this, the fact that music sometimes these days is sort of playlisted. It has a job of work for some things. It's music for study. It's music for this, that, mindfulness, etc., etc. Some of these pop up when we put in some of your work and non-classical artists' work. Although we don't want to put it in that genre.
I'm very curious.
Umbrella.
I'm very curious.
I wonder if that helps the label and your work to kind of reach different audiences.
Definitely. Yeah, definitely.
You know what I mean?
Definitely.
It sort of becomes put under a slightly perhaps uncomfortable umbrella for you, but nonetheless maybe a useful one. Is that fair to say?
I personally, I really don't mind, and I know that people's listening habits have changed a lot. And what I like about the kind of playlist streaming generation is that they do just quite fluidly move between genres, and often it's mood-based listening, and that's really great because in the past, when it was about going to record shops, you'd be very much stuck in a genre and you'd go to a record shop or the section of the record shop which was your genre, whereas now there's not that categorization. So I like that, and I think some people don't want to be categorized. They go, my music, it doesn't have a genre, it's just what I do. But you have to be realistic about it. There's like something like 10,000 releases a week, online. It's like the market, the whole world is saturated with music. You have to resign yourself to being pigeonholed so that people can actually find the stuff. Otherwise, it just gets lost.
I was listening to your symphony or concerto, can't remember, for turntables on the way in.
Oh, great.
Which I love. And I was wondering, therefore, what is your kind of key compositional instrument? Do you sit down at the piano? Where does it start? Is it notation? Where on earth do you start for something like that?
No, I'm a child of the 21st century, and I use computers all the time. So right. I have a big piano, but that's connected to my computer. I do kind of write at the piano, let's say, but rather than write it down, I play things in and it all just goes straight into the computer. And then I use the computer to build my compositions like a writer would use a word processor. And, and I think a lot of writers now copy and paste, move things around. And that's exactly what I do with the music. And I've got software that I can really use as a compositional tool and pass little musical ideas between different instruments. I can repeat them, I can invert them, I can stretch them, all kinds of nice techniques that people have done on pen and paper for years, but it's much quicker on a computer. So it's like, why the hell not? There's a kind of snobbery. Sometimes I feel inadequate because I'm not writing with a quill by candlelight. But, really, it's just not necessary.
In your garret.
Yeah, exactly. It's just not necessary anymore.
Yeah. And just finally, I wondered how 20 years of non-classical is a great thing. As I say, it's obviously been useful for you as a composer, but it's also probably eaten up a lot of the time that you might have been making your own music.
Yeah.
How does that work as a musician who has a label on which you have friends and accomplices? How does that work for you? Does it feed into your own creativity, your own work? Does it snap at its heels in a competitive way? I wonder what the reality of that is for an actual working composer.
No, it's really interesting. It really is interesting. And of course, there are times when I'm like, oh my God, why? Why am I doing this? You know, I should. And I look to some composers who all they do is compose. They don't have any of this extra stuff. And I look at them enviously and think, look, how come you're just getting on with your composition? And I've just spent half a day or a day like trying to get my head round the wording for, some social media post and then planning a concert program that I'm not even appearing in, but the thing is, it has to be done. And actually, especially in the first 10 years of non-classical, it did help my career as a composer, because I was out there experiencing how audiences are reacting, and I can feel which works are appealing more. So you're learning all the time about how relevant the music is. And then as well, by being the founder of non-classical, it helped get me out there. It was a good sort of calling card. So I think it's worth doing those things, because you do need to be out in the real world as a composer, and I think it's actually very solitary occupation all the time. So I need to get pulled out of my studio, to be honest. Otherwise I go mad. So that's the thing.
Well, congratulations to you on 20th birthday of non-classical.
There's one other thing I wanted to mention that's quite exciting. We've had our big 20th anniversary event at the Hackney Empire, but I think it's next week we're releasing an album of remixes from really esteemed producers who've taken different works from the catalogue. So we've got Matthew Herbert, we've got KMRU, who's a Kenyan producer doing a fantastic ambient piece, and Nyla Hunter from Los Angeles, and Pavel Milyakov. So there's a range of really great producers, and that's going to be our other celebration, because we've had this ongoing project of remixes when we get producers from outside the classical world to do remixes of classical works, and you end up with a really interesting kind of hybrid kind of music. Yeah.
Power to all their elbows and your own.
Yeah.
Gabriel Prokofiev, thank you very much
Thanks
indeed
so much
for joining us.
Cheers.
That was Gabriel Prokofiev of Non-Classical. And now I'm going to speak to Tonia Ko, composer and a musician who's worked with forms and instruments, both conventional and very much not. Her bubble wrap concerto is a case in point. Tonia, it is wonderful to have you on the programme as well. Now, we just heard from Gabriel, who set up all of the kind of background on non-classical, and we obviously started off by talking about this brilliant 20th birthday concert a couple of weeks ago, and he mentioned a pin drop moment that featured one of your compositions and you playing as well. Now, I know that some of the instruments that you use, or some of the materials that you use, are no great fans of pins, presumably. So tell me about your part of this wonderful, brave, and beautifully lit, it has to be said, concert at the Hackney Empire a couple of weeks ago.
Sure. So, it was very exciting to be part of this big show, and my part of it was a performance of Breath Contained 3, which is my concerto for amplified bubble wrap with orchestra.
I love the sound of that. I mean, I love the sound of it, and I love the sound of it. People, I can hear now thousands of people tapping away on their keyboards Googling this, because this has to be heard to be believed. Tell me about the performance of it on the night, because I've seen this performed. I can't remember the name of the orchestra. Maybe it was the American Composers Orchestra.
No, it was a group called Contemporaneous, who commissioned and did the world premiere in Brooklyn last year. And so for this performance, it was an entirely different experience, because in Brooklyn, it was much more, I guess, a traditional concert. And, people did laugh a bit at the end because the last gesture is me and the orchestra popping the bubble. But yeah, the atmosphere was very electric in the Hackney Empire. And of course, it was such a thrill to perform with the LSO. But I was actually quite surprised when the audiences kind of giggled when I started playing on one bubble halfway through the piece. And actually, it was a nice moment because up until then, I had been understandably a bit nervous and, taking my performance quite seriously, trying to get the perfect sounds out of friction playing on bubble wrap. And that really kind of released the energy for me.
Yeah. And is that the proper response? I guess Gabriel was talking about almost that there is no proper response to this music. People dig it, people stand up, people lull to it, people kind of want to be. He was welcoming these moments of audience participation because it shows that people are engaged and they're sort of bright-eyed and bushy-tailed about the music that's being played in front of them. Does the same go for you? That it's kind of a bit of a exhalation for you to hear the audience participating in that way?
I think it was the proper response for that performance. I think it was appropriate to what Gabriel kind of wanted to happen. Mm-hmm. But for me, I think this piece in particular, this whole project with bubble wrap is quite paradoxical because on one hand, I'm very serious about the sounds I produce and I try to think about the sounds intricately and orchestrate them accurately in the orchestra. So yeah, there's a very serious side to what I'm doing. And on the other hand, it's been a half joke that's lasted over a decade. Whether or not I'm playing bubble wrap as a musical instrument in this extended way. So yeah, I think it can easily flip both ways. And over the course of the piece, I think there are many potential emotional reactions that an audience can have.
There is some sort of metaphor that I'm not going to quite unpack about the pricking of the pomposity of certain amounts of contemporary classical music. And there is an element of that, I suppose, that at the end of your performance, you pop the bubble.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. We've gone there. We've done it. I can never resist explaining it. And tell me about how you write for that, or whether you are. How different is each performance of that piece, and how different has the performance of that piece been in different places around the world?
It was actually the UK premiere of Breath Contained 3 and only the second performance. So I'm looking forward to seeing what will happen in a couple of weeks in Luxembourg. I'll be performing the piece with the Luxembourg Philharmonic at the Rainy Days Festival, a much more expanded version for large orchestra. So yeah, I only have those two experiences to compare.
Okay.
But I will say that performing with bubble wrap has been different between my improv performances, where I'm just playing alone or with other improvisers, and in this setting. So in the orchestral setting, I'm not as free in terms of taking time, in terms of responding to the orchestra. So there are kind of composed elements that I try to stick with. And at the same time, it is a reflection of a decade's worth of sonic work on finding what these sounds translate to in terms of the orchestra. So it is kind of already built in.
And I wonder how interested you are. I mean, this is obviously a boundary-breaking thing. You are using materials that are clearly not generally used in music to make music from as well. How important is that to you? And when did you kind of start thinking in these ways? I wonder if there was something you heard as a student, as a kid, growing up, where you kind of, that was something strange to be used as an instrument, but you were like, I love the sound of this. Or what are the possibilities of this? Where could I walk with this?
So my background is in classical music, and my education as a composer has been very much, understanding the experimentation that's happened in the 20th century. And so I was always quite interested in stretching the boundaries of traditional instruments. So via extended techniques like playing the violin in unusual ways, not just bowing it or plucking it, but even maybe knocking the body of the instrument to get percussive sounds. So that was always one way that I was going towards. Another strand of it would be, even more experimental music, a la John Cage, who used, objects and water in his compositions. And I think those two worlds have never really come together. In a sense, experimental music with just objects and soundscapes it seems to me that it's developed quite separately from this more, I guess, instrument-focused strand of things. And I think my work is a way of kind of insisting that they should live together.
Yeah. And it's fascinating. And I wondered how whether your work with these unusual instruments, these unusual materials, if they are purely for you a sonic endeavour, or whether you were trying to imbue the spirit of the air trapped in a plastic bubble, or for John Cage, maybe, the nature of water, using it in unusual ways in recordings and performances. Are you trying to reach into the essence of that other thing, or are you only interested in the sonics of it, I wonder?
Certainly when I started, it was very abstract. I was just thinking about the sounds, how I can make as many different sounds as I could from the bubble wrap. Over the years, of course, the environmental aspects have become much more evident. I try not to buy any new bubble wrap when I perform. I just scavenge for whatever I have. And I think also, just as a composer, I'm trying to express myself through a piece, and therefore the emotional aspects do come into play. So this idea of the pent-up energy that's, wanting to be released. I think the choice of title for the entire Breath Contained project has sort of kept me going over the years.
Yeah, it's a very beautiful thing, and we should push people in the direction of. I mean, I watched this on YouTube. Where is the version that you would like to share with listeners of this piece? Where is the best version of it that people can access readily to listen to it?
Well, I've yet to make a proper recording of it, which is something I'd love to do in the future.
Okay, right.
But yeah, it's the world premiere of Breath Contained.
Yeah.
That's on YouTube.
Yeah. And it's an amazing thing. Obviously, you've got that wonderful title, which I guess incorporates the spirit of what you're playing. But it's quite tense in moments. It's got there's something musically tense about it. I found. Is that again, is that the appropriate response? There's tension and release. And what I wondered was, how do you interact? How do you interact with an orchestra? How do you instruct an orchestra on the spirit of the piece? What do you communicate in words, or do you only communicate in music? I wonder, when you're talking about the tone, and the rhythm of a piece like that.
For this piece, the orchestra part is quite specific. So my own part, because I can't really control bubble wrap to play very specific rhythms, it's much more free. It's partially improvised. And so for the orchestra part, yes, I do use words. I think the piece starts with the expression mark, delightful frenzy.
Right. Okay. Yeah.
And I think because it's an instrument that, I think only I play, they do need to hear it to understand how to play with me. And so I think that's where the rehearsals are really important. So I can communicate, like, it's this kind of squeak at this kind of tempo, this kind of energy I'm looking for. And then I think even without being explicit in the score, great musicians will respond to that.
Yeah. And what do you listen to when you're outside of your own compositions? What do you listen to? Do you listen to the things that are, I dare say, it's similar to the work that you make, Tonia? Or do you listen to something that is entirely different? Are you listening to Sanson or something that's a little bit more mellifluous? Or I wonder whether you have a detox that is dissimilar to your own work, or how that works. I always love asking composers or novelists or anyone about this, because do you listen to similar stuff to your own when you're making music, I wonder?
I think there's a research part of composing where I am trying to find inspiration.
Yeah.
But yeah, the detox, I think, I do listen to Sanson. I love old...
That's a good guess.
I love old music.
Yeah.
Especially the places in musical history where things go a little bit out of whack, but not entirely. So very late foray has been interesting to me lately. But yeah, quite eclectic in terms of what I choose to listen to.
And I'm always interested in sort of people's first dipping their toe into the music that they love and the music that they make. What about for you growing up? What was on the radio? What was in the sort of family record collection that you remember that pricked your ears up and got you into this in the first place, Tonia, I wonder?
Yeah, it might come as more surprises. So I grew up in Honolulu, Hawaii. And so I listened to a lot of guess, popular Hawaiian music.
Right. So,
that's on the radio.
so you've seen the ukulele put through its paces.
Yes. No, I love that sound, that kind of dry, brittle sound. I come back to it, actually. And in my family, no musicians, but my family are from Hong Kong, so we listen to a lot of Cantonese pop from the 80s and the 90s.
Yeah. And that's got a lot of swing and rhythm to it, right? It's a very good language for pop music, Cantonese. It seems.
Yeah. Very melodic.
Yeah, melodic. Yeah, that's the
With
word I'm struggling
bittersweet
for.
vibes.
Yeah, exactly. Tonia, thank you so much for talking us through the specifics of Breath Contained Part 3. Good luck with playing it in Luxembourg.
Thank you.
Come back and tell us
Sure.
which was the better version, which was the more real rendition. And again, also congratulations on being part of this wonderful 20 years of non-classical. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
And that was Tonia Ko, composer and non-classical artist. And my thanks to Tonia and Gabriel Prokofiev for their time, wit and wisdom on today's show. Search non-classical for upcoming shows and intel on a super fascinating musical movement and label. There is, for example, a 20th anniversary remix release reworking the non-classical catalogue, including work from Matthew Herbert, Kamaru and Nyla Hunter. That's out on the 22nd of November. And Gabriel performs at the EFG London Jazz Festival on Sunday the 24th of November at World Heartbeat at Embassy Gardens in London. Monocle on Culture is produced by Sophie Monaghan-Coombs and Steph Chungu, who also edits the show. Many thanks to Mariella Bevan for her help with today's programme. We'll be back with more next week, but for the time being, from me, Robert Bounds, thank you very much for tuning in.